All art starts as an idea. And for me, this Lore of the Silverhand idea started with this very tiny, tiny drawing of Lore of the Silverhand. Now, in the month of October, I was inking these small little drawings from Drawing the Marvel Way and also from artists I just love to try to get better at inking art. But also, I like the work of Mike Mignola's Hellboy. And I love how he does these little sketches that he turns into full illustrations by just messing around and doodling. And I wanted to do that for my own character. So let's bring everyone back up to speed. First, we started with this small little thumbnail, and then we brought that up into a more developed ink concept work, which has all of the elements that I want to put into a final illustration. From there, we find reference and have a more developed sketch that we turn into tight pencils or tighter pencils of the full image up to scale. Next up, we have the Strathmore Bristol Smooth, which is a comic book sheet of paper at 11 by 17, and this is what we will work on. By first transferring the image of the printout onto this sheet to make this easier to ink, especially for the camera. So now we have the image transferred down to sturdier paper and we're ready to ink. After, I knock it back a little bit with a kneaded eraser and we're ready to go. Now currently my inking has a 3-step process that usually starts with inking the outlines, and then I move to spot blacks, which give dimensionality to the forms, because it's a form in space, simulated space. And then detailing and corrections, which can be a fairly long process given the complexity of the illustration itself. So let's start with the outlines. The outlines is going to be the longest part of my inking process. It usually takes the longest because this is the part where I am the most focused, and because there's so much fine details and the amount of characters and other odd bits and bobs around it for this piece, it's going to be a while. So I try to settle in. Getting started is the hardest part. So once I get started and I try to think about energy management, because that's going to be a difficult part. So I break everything up into 2-hour max limit. I put on maybe some music or a podcast, and whatever that timer on that music or podcast, I go with that. Try to drink a lot of water. And then in that 2-hour limit, I try to get up and go do something else. Just take a break, at least 15 minutes. Maybe half an hour, maybe an hour. The shorter the break, the quicker my recovery time goes down, and then I get fidgety again. So I try to give myself enough of a break to focus on, this one's going to be something. Inking for me is less intensive than the drawing part. So now that I have a fairly tight pencils, I can pretty much think about other things, which allows me to put on music and podcasts. And it's all about execution. Execution is everything now. But I try not to get too tight, too focused, too wrapped up in my own head, and try to have fun with this phase. So for me, just as I broke down my total inking process into phases, I also break down the image into phases. And I usually start from the upper left to going down to the lower right to keep my hand out of out of ink and smearing ink, because I've done that before. Don't want to do that again because that can ruin your work. But also I start with the skulls, the phantom skulls on top, and using these phantom skulls as a warm-up area, because I know I'd be pretty rusty, but I work my way into get the jitters out of my hand, get my mind thinking about inking and line weights and all of that by first focusing on the minor things and then getting into the more substantial characters. And so moving from upper left to lower right, the phantom skulls, the hero, our lead character, and the unicorn. But then I also break down the unicorn into its own separate pieces, because this beast is going to be a beast and it's going to take up a lot of time because there's so much going on with it. So I even break that up into, say, the mane, and then first, if I get the head, I'll be the most fresh getting the head down. And once I get the head down, then I can get everything around it with the mane and then the body, and then putting on the scales for the body last, because that's going to be a lot of fine details. So I'll break out the pins for that. Another character of very tight focused importance is our lead character, Lore. And for him, I have a very particular way of inking in mind, where I want to focus on the hand that is hanging from his neck off of a chain, that he has his two hands able, right? You would figure if they cut off his one hand, he would have another hand, but he has his two hands and the third one around his neck. So that is going to be part of the focus. His face, of course, because he is our lead character, and an audience will always look at your character's face to see any hint of emotion, distress, or whatever. But I want the inking to be bold from the foot up to about the midsection. So it's going to be solid black inks, but we'll get to that. And then it's going to be the skulls and pretty much darkness all around him, but he will stand out as the focal point. And also the unicorn will also have its own focal area because there's so much detail going on with that. So those are like my two leading elements. And then everything is built up around those two. But of course, it's all about execution. Execution, execution. So let's keep going. Now, as for my tools, I'm using one of my newer brush pens that I got very recently, and I'm really liking it. I'm calling it the Cambio because it's got that written on it, and other, I think, Chinese lettering and whatnot that I can't quite understand, but I call it the Cambio. And I like it a lot so far. And this part is pretty much the easiest or the less in terms of tools. Not much else is going on because you just need this, and I'm just, doing fine details, trying to remember line weights, thick and thins, but it's not too intensive. The intensity will come in tools later on. Now, one thing I must note that to me it feels like things that are fun to draw are also fun to ink, or that if I'm really interested in a drawing or how the drawing turned out, that carries over usually to the inking process. So the inking and the outline of this unicorn cursed thing, I was having a blast just on the outlines. The detailing with the armor scales, that's going to be a whole different thing, but just getting this outlines and how it looks, I really enjoyed this part of the art making process or the inking process for myself. Thick and thin lines and just going off of whatever my whimsy is, because it's not, horses are real, but this isn't. And so I'm like, I'm just letting my flights of fancy just go with it, and I'm imagining what it is, what it does, and it speaks telepathically, and how the voice would sound. And I'm even sometimes talking to myself as I ink, using the voice or practicing the voice of this thing. Yeah, art can get a little odd sometimes, but that's kind of how it goes. But then we have to get to, oh man, what I thought was going to be worse, but it was kind of better than I expected, was doing all of these skulls. I don't think I want to draw any more skulls in the future, but for this, I was kind of on a roll, just adding skulls like in different positions. I have a skull in my room called Horatio, who I just turned in different directions. I used skulls that I saw in Mike Magnola's work, whatever I could think of position wise. And after a while, I got pretty good doing this not too accurate skull drawing, because it's fairly simple, like the Halloween type drawings that you could see. And I just kept going, and it wasn't so bad, even though I had to do quite a lot of them. But it was kind of fun. Now, one thing about illustration making and art making in general is that you can put in whatever you want. And for this illustration, I was thinking about the children. And historically, I think unicorns and children have been kind of linked in stories. And unicorns in folk tales and whatnot usually have a purifying effect. And also there's a thing, versions, purity, and all of this unique storytelling ideas. But in this story of this cursed unicorn, this monstrous creature, that this village has been feeding its children to this creature. And that's part of the lore story, as he meets two children on the road, and they're on their way to meet this unicorn, and he gets caught up in, the children don't know that this thing is a monster, and he didn't know that it was a monster, and he didn't even think it was real. And how he gets caught up in like what this creature has done to them, because it's transformed these children into kind of sort of beings like him through a process of his horn, and when he touches a creature, can transform them into something akin to itself. And so I made this little, I don't know, for me it was like a storytelling part that's so minor in this illustration, but I wanted to have it shown that there is a mountain of corpses that our lead hero Lore has caused, but also that this creature over the centuries and millennia, if I could say it, there we go, that it has corrupted and pretty much killed everything it has come in contact with, and how the mountains of bodies between these two is pretty substantial, and that it also tells this mini tale that I also thought was kind of cool. And that's what I like about illustrations, that you can have something that an audience doesn't even know about and really doesn't care about. They just want to see a cool image, more or less. But that you can have stories and ideas and higher concepts worked into the work that has a minor importance, but it it makes the image better, I feel. And that's what I wanted to do with this part of this small corner of the illustration, where it helps inform the story of lore and this monstrous creature, but also kind of looks interesting or adds some kind of more interest to the piece. Now we're starting the part that I was dreading for quite some time, and that is the scale armor of the unicorn. And I knew it would take a while. So I broke it into 2 parts, well, off and on during 2 days. And I just had to buckle down and get it done. So I took my time, which it tested my patience, but I knew what I wanted, and I knew it would just take time to get it done. And so I broke out my microns, and I just got started. Bit by bit, worked at it, kept going, took breaks, drank water, listened to music, and just kept at it. And then finally in the detailing phase, well, the outlining phase, I started doing details on Lore's face, because that's where most people would look, and doing little bits and bobs here and there to tighten this outline face up. And that would be the outlining phase. So now it's time for spot blacks, one of the dirtiest, roughest, messiest parts that I love dearly, besides the detailing and corrections, which is my second favorite. But this part is the part that gets, yeah, I love it the most. So I have a brush, I have my inks, I knock it back with a kneaded eraser, and then I usually scan it to preserve a copy of it, just in case anything should happen, but also for myself. And then I make a value inking with some watered down inks. So for the hair of Lore, I'm putting this value down, and I'm going to do his hair just slightly different. Well, I'm going to stain some blacks in later, but I wanted to do that first. And now I usually start from, again, upper left to a lower right. But because I want to do Lore in slightly different way, and that is to totally blacken his body from the foot to about the midsection, leaving his left hand untouched. His right hand will be roughly inked, and I want to have higher contrast for the hand that is chained around his neck. So darkening all of this in up to that midsection, and then having some rough textury inking, I think will look good for it. I've never really done this before, and so this is more of an experiment for myself, but I think it will be cool. And so this is what practice is for, to try out new things and see what happens, even if it doesn't work. I tried it, and but I think this should work, but we'll see. Okay. And once I have Lore in pretty much the place that I want him at this point, now I go about my normal standard way of doing it, which is, again, upper left to lower right after I let Lore dry, which I think I can keep my hand out of all that. But yeah, the starry sky will be this upper area of the picture, and it will be where most of my darks are, and then there will be intermittent spot blacks in the middle, and then for the skulls it's going to be a textured layer of kinetic energy, but we'll see how that looks when we get to it. So let's go. Now, laying down the spot blacks is a fairly breezy process, and it just takes patience, but it's usually quicker than the outlines because it's more bold and kinetic, and it's interesting. You're separating the background or giving the character's form, and I really like I just really like laying down the blacks. I've also noticed that other artists usually will sometimes put an X where the they'll cover that with black so that you know exactly where your blacks are going to be, and I like that. I don't usually do that, but I like that concept. But for myself, I know where I'm going, especially like the X is useful if somebody else did the art and you're doing the inking, so that somebody else will know. But since I did both the drawing and I'm now doing the inking, I've worked with this and I know where I'm going. So that's one thing. But yeah, just start to lay into it. And this is when to me, the illustration starts to feel like a more finished piece is in this phase. Maybe that's why I also like, kind of getting messy and dirty and, scuffing up stuff, and I get to do that here. Now, once I had most of the out the starry sky portion done, then I moved on to value inking, another layer to kind of figure out where I'm going because I want to do some texture, uh, rough brush ink texture work, and this will help me figure out where to put those. So it's kind of like a planning or setup phase. Now, once the values are in, this is where the true messiness will begin, and that is with texture. Now, for the skulls, I'm not too concerned about them, and plus they're going to be textured over. Well, some of it will be anyways. So I kind of go in quick style and just do what I wish. I'm not too concerned with it, but yes, it's just getting it done. And then, well, when we continue on with the texturing, I want energy. I want this feel of like flames or some kind of a feeling of waves are coming away from Lore. So he's the center focal point, and like these energy waves, almost like fire, is coming off and away from him. So I have this old beat up brush, and I've had it for a long time, and it's kind of beat up on its own, and so I dip it in ink, and then I use the test sheet on the side to try to get most of the ink off, and then I start to make these rubbing texture, and I go back to that scratchy sheet, and then go back with the ink, and then move back to the illustration, and I keep doing that over and over and over again for this effect of a scratchy, non-uniform, dynamic energy coming off of. Also, it gives a good smoky, not uneven, smoky look, I guess. But I'm just working all around now. I know where I'm going. I have most of it in, and now we're plussing, we're pushing. I know where things need to be, and I'm adding those as they come up, as I see them, and I'm just bouncing all around. So sometimes I ink certain spots, and then I go back to the texture inking, and then I do other spots, and then back to texture inking, and I just continue this over and over and over again. And this concludes the spot black part, spot black phase, if you will. And now it's time for the final phase, the detailing and correction phase. So here I have all the equipment for that. I have some off-white, which I put into this little dish. I have my white jelly roll, a toothbrush, and that's going to be used with the titanium, well, or off-white anyways. I have some correction fluid and my whole bunch of microns of a smaller variety for getting in there with the details. And this can be the most chaotic, energetic, messy portion, at least for myself, because I like to get into it. So let's get into it. So first I start with detailing, and detailing for me is bouncing around the image, trying to find all the little bits and bobs that I have missed and things that I want to plus or make more clear, maybe some fine detail work. And so that's all over the piece. Whatever I think needs to be done, I get in there and get it done. And there's usually a lot. And this phase can take quite some time because of all the details that I usually want to add. And I can find these things for days. Like if I walk away, come back, I see something else that needs to be developed, changed, altered, and all of that. So I try to give myself some time, walk away, come back, do a little bit more, walk away, come back, and just keep doing that over and over. And it also depends on how, I guess, sophisticated the artwork is or how much detail you want to put into it, because a lot of this stuff will go over a casual viewer's head. They're like, hey, either they like it or they don't. They might say, hey, cool image, and then that's about it. While you can be detailing a thing for hours for, I wouldn't say minimal gain, but there are diminishing returns on some of this. And I know that, but I do it anyways because it's fun for me. And so I just continue on. Also, I take particular focus with our lead characters, especially Lore, and I touch up a lot for him. I bounce around, go back and forth. But one thing I wanted to try, as I've seen this done in other people's work, and that's fingerprints, using fingerprints on your art to give it added texture. So I'm practicing on the scratch piece on the side, dabbing my pinky into it, and then touching the piece. Now you want to do a light touch, but also it takes practice, and that's why I have this sheet on the side. You want your fingerprints to show, and it gives texture, but you don't want to just blob, which it's fairly difficult. And I haven't really done this before, but I've seen it done, and I really like the look, so I was gonna say, hey, why not try it? And so that's what I'm trying here. Again, this is messy, and you use this at your own peril, right? For myself, I'm using this at my own peril. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm like, hey, this is practice. Why not? And so yes, I'm dabbing it and then putting my fingerprints down, but also because there's excess ink on my finger, I can rub it and then make, it rubs off onto the artwork. And so with that, and my finger is still dirty, but I'm continuing on. I said this is the dirtiest phase. So now I'm going in with some more ink wash, touching that up, giving some form and value to it. this lead. Children, I'm doing that for that. And I'm just bouncing around. Whatever I see, I do. Because sometimes I'll forget if I walk away and go, hey, I should have done such and such. You walk away, I forget, and then I never touch that. So I try to get it while I'm looking at it, and I'm just bouncing all over the image, whatever I see and find. And another thing I wanted to try was splattering. Well, I've done this in watercolor with gouache on top of watercolor, but this is that white gouache. And as you can see, I use that test piece, and you dip it and then you flick it off of the toothbrush, these bristles, and it makes inconsistent dot patterns. Like, I can make the dots myself, but they don't usually look as good as the randomness of splattering. So I'm practicing splattering, and it's really fun. And I kind of do it too much sometimes, but I really like the effect of it because there's randomness to it. It livens the piece, I think, where you have enough randomness because everything else is made by you. There's, for the starry sky, I wanted the stars to be randomly placed. So that's what I'm using this for. Also, I was, doing some texturing with my thumb, but also with the white Jelly Roll pen. If there's little areas that I don't want to get all splattery, I then go in and add some hand-picked stars, hand-placed stars with this white Jelly Roll. So there's various ways to do things. And I'm still practicing, I'm still learning, but I really like all of this experimentation for this. Pretty much I'm just kind of going ham on it. I like, this is fun. This is fun for me. I'm at play. I'm not exactly thinking. I got most of it down. I know what I'm doing. Well, no, I don't, but I know that the image pretty much looks the way it should look. And I'm at play right now. I'm riffing, it's playtime. And that's what I like. So whatever I see, I do. And we're coming to the end. So now one of the last things is correction fluid. I have this correction fluid that you squeeze and it comes out, and I'm touching up some of the edges and some things that I messed up on in the inking phase. Sometimes, you go over things and you're like, oops, there's a mistake. And so that's where I come in with the correction fluid to give it that final touch, pushing it and making things hopefully better. And so again, I just jump around, whatever needs doing, I do it. Now, something else I use with correction fluid, well, with this particular correction fluid, is an Exacto knife to scrape off excess whiteout. And I learned that it'll sit on top, and so I can scrape it and chisel it if I need to, which I think is pretty cool, and a way to correct some of my overcorrections with correcting fluid. And so now I love that little eye detail with the white Jelly Roll, and this is where the kind of sort of tight pencils, or at least to know where I was going. Let me put this away so I don't cut myself. So this was what we started with. Well, and this is what we have now. This is the full completed piece. I know I'll look at it tomorrow and think, oh, I should touch this up or that up. I know that's going to happen, but sometimes you have to call it. And this is what the finished piece looks like. We have our all the elements. We have the phantom skulls. We have our starry sky with the moon. And we transition down to the phantom skulls, our monstrous demon unicorn fighting Lore in the background, top of skulls. We have Lore with a cut out severed hand around his neck. We have the children that were victims of this unicorn, the skulls, and this effect, this textured effect on the background. Now we have some of the detail shots. I like the 3 eyes. Well, he has 7 eyes technically, but 6 eyes on each side of the monstrous unicorn with the whiteout highlights. We have the children that fortunately have become victims of this monstrous creature. And we have Lore of the Silverhand, looking rough for wear, but still mysterious, filthy, rugged, and that was Lore of the Silverhand prisoner illustration, done in, well, it's done in mixed media now. It has a lot of stuff. It's mostly inks, but also some whiteout, some, I think, some gouache. I think it's off-white or titanium white. I can't remember which one. Correction fluids, all of that. And that is Lore of the Silverhand. So for the recap, this is where we kind of sort of started. Well, we had that small little thumbnail, which we brought up to this ink concept work, which has most of the elements within it. And then we moved on to the larger pencil phase. So we have the pencil sketch that we moved to the tight pencils, where I used the light table to work that up. And then we have the outlines of the inking. Then we use that ink outline and we go in with the spot blacks to do the sky and the skulls and all the details. And then we move on to texture work, detailing, correction fluid, all of that. And this is the final piece. Lore of the Silverhand prisoner illustration complete. Whew. That was some work. That was a lot of work, but I like how it turned out in the end. And that's all we want as artists, right? We want something that we can be happy with and proud of at the end. So that is the finale of this 3-part series of Lore of the Silverhand. I will be taking a break for the holiday next week, and then after that, so in 2 weeks, I shall return with, I think we'll start planning for next year. So I have been your host, Trey Hodges. You can find my work at treyhodges.com. But anyways, thank you for joining me. I would like to say power to all the creators. Take care and keep shining, and I will see you on the next episode. Bye-bye.